Now, very quickly, most of us come to Iqbal in translation, and some of us come to Iqbal in translation in English, are of course familiar with the names of Nicholson and Arberry especially. Now, Reinhold Nicholson's respectful and admiring introduction to the translation of Iqbal's Secrets of the Self spells out the destination which will guide the reader. Basically, he says, this is a complicated poem. So if you know where it's going to get to, it will help you to make sense of the poem. Now, what is interesting is that he's someone who respects and tries to find a balance between the poetic in it and the message, the philosophical message in it. But here he trumps it. Okay? He gets ahead of himself and he says, basically, if you want to know what the poem is about, it's about a vision and project of a theocratic utopian state by a religious enthusiast inspired by the vision of a new Mecca and the union of all Muslims. And basically, all non-Muslims to him are unbelievers, and in theory, at any rate, the jihad is justified. So, if you are a non-Muslim and you're about to read this text, you're going to have some interesting issues to deal with how you're going to approach it. The metaphor of awakening, which is very important to Iqbal, we heard it a couple of times in some of the poems that were read. You read the one about the caravan bell will awaken in your heart and so on. The metaphor of awakening, which is recurrent in Iqbal, appears with an edge in Arthur Arbery's The Mysteries of Selflessness, which I quoted in the abstract of my paper. This is published in 1953, a year after the Cairo Black Sunday, Saturday of 1952, which he reads as the portents of the Oriental contempt for Europe. So in introducing Iqbal, he says, we've got two important things here. We've got the establishment of this state of Pakistan that promises so much, and then we've got this awakening of the Muslim world, of the Oriental, which is a very worrying thing. Is it going to be a clash of civilizations? Which way is it going to lead? These are questions. Those questions are now going to haunt the reading of the question of Khudi in Iqbal, obviously. So little surprising that post 9/11, as I mentioned in the abstract, in 2005, in a review of a collection of texts by the symbolic interactionist Herbert Blumer, which included notes of a talk that he did in the 1970s on the concept of self in Iqbal, basically, here's a guy whose whole philosophical enterprise has been around questions of self. He's challenged to look into Iqbal. He looks into Iqbal and he says, wow, Iqbal is grappling with exactly the kinds of things that I was grappling with and gets to the answers that I am getting at. Now, these texts are recovered, collected, published. In 2005, they are reviewed by Dmitri Shalin, who says, alas, Iqbal's plea for Muslim reawakening that Blumer endorses has a different ring to it in the post-September 11 world. So, the notion of the development of Muslim assertion is something that is encoded with particular forms of understanding of what it means to flex the muscles of Islam and Muslims in the world. Now, of those critics who have engaged with Iqbal drawing directly on the post-9/11 context with Muslim militancy and terror, two are worth mentioning in particular very briefly. One is Mahmoud Mamdani, whose Good Muslim, Bad Muslim is a classic for the name on its own, but America, the Cold War, and the Roots of Terror, many of you will know it's a critique of culture talk. The other one is by Faisal Devji in both the books Landscapes of the Jihad and The Terrorist in Search of Humanity, Militant Islam and Global Politics, published 3 years apart in 2005 and 2008. Now, Mamdani first mentions Iqbal in the context of his argument that political Islam develops under non-clerical intellectuals. So the first thing he wants to do, what he wants to do, Mamdani really, is to disturb, to open up, to unravel Western categories of looking at the non-Western world. So in the Western world, political Christianity is fundamentalist in that it is clerical, and he wants to say political Islam in the Muslim world is actually something that is developed by non-clerical figures like the intellectuals such as Iqbal. So the next thing he immediately does is to say that Iqbal and Jinnah are, I quote, spokespersons for the political rights of Muslims, religious category, but, quote, determinedly secular in orientation. So Iqbal and Jinnah have to be put together, and they get now reread as secular because this now suits the particular argument that Mamdani is advancing. Whether Iqbal can fit into the category or not is something that we can pose. So Iqbal functions as one of the quartet of figures, Maududi, Qutb, Iqbal and Jinnah, whom Mamdani uses to complicate the stories and the histories of political religion. Basically, the second thing that Iqbal figures for, and it's only in passing, is the notion that he had a dream of a nation beyond the nation state, whereas Maududi ends up with the banality of a Pakistan, which is a state in the classic form. So, in truth, Iqbal didn't really do anything in this text, and there was nothing important about Iqbal in this text about Iqbal as such, other than as support for a thesis that Mamdani wants to bring up. Now, it's intended to confound Western mappings of culture, but Iqbal is neither here nor there, nor is his Islamism of any particular significance in terms of its content. The only detailed discussion of it is actually a quote from Aisha Jalal at great length on Iqbal's approval of the abolition of the Caliphate. Now, in Faisal Devji, we have the opposite. Iqbal is referred to in the first book, Landscapes of the Jihad, as perhaps the most important thinker of modern Islam and the one whose work remains hugely popular in many parts of the world, and in the second book, as undoubtedly the most important and indeed the most popular Muslim thinker of 20th century South Asia, though his influence went well beyond the subcontinent. Now, what is interesting is that Iqbal not only is given this central stage, but he is made into the figuration of the relations between text and context, of the emergence of our Islam, the Islam that we are a part of indeed the Islamic movements of our times. This is perhaps most crucial in landscapes, where Iqbal represents those Muslims, it's in the plural, okay, thanks. Iqbal represents those Muslims, so it's in the plural, who founded the modernity of Islam on the death of God. So this is absolutely central to the argument. So all of you who have read Reconstruction will remember that what Iqbal argues, and this is central to his argument, is that the Prophet, with his final revelation being the final prophet, after him there is no more revelation, therefore there is no more guidance from God. Man is thrown upon himself. This is the death of God as transposed into the Muslim context. It is the beginning of modernity. Now, Devji says that he is one of, he doesn't give examples of others, and this is one of the interesting questions that I would also like to put to Javed, because he talked about all these things that he said about Iqbal, but it's important to know whether this is exemplary, unique, or part of a larger discourse. Now, in this death of God, of course, then is central to the whole philosophy of Hudi in Iqbal. In The Terrestrial Search of Humanity, the second text, again, the object of the book is really Al-Qaeda and the suicide bomber, just like in the first text it was Al-Qaeda and Jihad. Iqbal, again, only makes a brief reference. It's 3 pages in one, 2 pages in the other, but it is crucially important and representative. Here, Iqbal figures for the representation of 2 developments. Firstly, the refashioning of imagined geographies of Arabness. We heard about that already from Javed earlier on today, in which the category of Arab is decoupled from ethno-nationalism and becomes the source of the kinds of discourses that Osama bin Laden himself trades upon. So that when militant Islam has traction outside the Middle East, it is because of the way that the figure of the Arab has been decoupled from ethno-nationalist readings, which he reads back to Iqbal.